Shadows of the Velian Throne. The Velian throne world was a realm of both splendor and dread, a testament to a species that thrived on dominance and reverence. Its sky was a ceaseless swirl of shifting auroras, casting ethereal shadows over the great hall of ascendance. This place, carved from the petrified heart of a celestial leviathan, was a sanctum of judgment where fate itself seemed to bow to the will of the Velian dominion. Cal Draven stood at the heart of this alien majesty, his rugged features betraying no hint of the unease coiling within him. He was a traitor, a wanderer of the stars, accustomed to dancing on the razor's edge of diplomacy among species far more powerful than his own. Yet today was different. Today, he was not here for profit or survival. He was here to gamble with the impossible. Before him, the accused stood trembling. She was a girl, no more than 7 years old, her fragile frame dwarfed by the crystalline chains binding her to the floor. Her dark hair clung to her tear-streaked face, and her violet dress, once pristine, now bore the grime of captivity. Alina, a name he had learned only hours before, yet one that now burned in his mind with a weight he couldn't explain. Above them loomed the Eldrax, a being of radiant malice. Its form was a towering silhouette of obsidian and refracted light, as if the stars themselves had been forged into its crystalline body. The alien judge's multiple eyes glowed with an inner fire, casting sharp beams across the chamber. Thousands of Velian nobles and soldiers watched from the terraces above, their alien features illuminated by the cold light of the Eldrax's gaze. The human child has violated the sanctity of the Forge of Eternity, the Eldrax declared, its voice a symphony of discordant tones. She has trespassed upon hallowed ground, a crime punishable by death. Her sentence is execution, to serve as a warning to all who would defy the Dominion. The crowd responded with a low, rumbling approval. Cal's fists tightened at his sides, but he forced himself to remain outwardly composed. A single wrong word could mean his death as well. "I ask for the right to speak," Cal said, his voice firm but measured. The Eldrax's gaze fixed on him. "Human merchant, you dare interrupt the judgment of this court?" "I do," Cal replied, stepping closer to the center of the arena. "Because this judgment is not justice. It is cruelty." A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd, a mix of amusement and outrage. The Eldrax tilted its angular head, as though curious. Justice is defined by the Dominion, not by the opinions of an outsider. Cal took a deep breath. He had survived countless deals on razor-thin margins, but this was a gamble of an entirely different scale. "Your laws are sacred to you. I understand that. But this child, this human, could not have known the Forge was forbidden. She is innocent of malice, and you punish her simply for existing." The Eldrax's voice darkened, reverberating through the chamber. "Ignorance does not absolve guilt. The laws of the Dominion are absolute." Cal clenched his jaw. "Absolute laws are brittle. They break under the weight of reason. You call yourselves the pinnacle of civilization, yet you would destroy a child for what? For trespassing. What strength does that show? What glory?" The crowd erupted into hushed whispers, the alien spectators torn between disdain and intrigue. The Eldrax's glowing eyes narrowed, its towering form shifting as it regarded Cal with something that might have been amusement or menace. "You speak boldly for one so insignificant," the Eldrax said. "What do you offer in place of her life? What value could you possibly hold that would sway the Dominion?" Cal's mind raced. He had no resources to barter, no artifacts of power to appease these creatures. All he had was his wits, his words, and a resolve that burned brighter than the fear threatening to overtake him. "I offer a challenge," Cal said, his voice rising with a mix of defiance and desperation. "Grant me the chance to prove her life is worth sparing. Let her fate be decided not by your laws, but by her potential, and mine." The Eldrax's eyes burned brighter, and the chamber fell silent. The alien judge's voice was a slow, deliberate hum. "You challenge the will of the Dominion." "I do," Cal said, standing firm. Because mercy, tempered by wisdom, is the mark of true strength. Test me, test her, and if we fail, we will accept your judgment. The silence stretched, the weight of Kel's words hanging in the air like a blade. Then, slowly, the Eldrax raised one crystalline arm, its gesture signaling something ancient and foreboding. "Very well, human," the Eldrax said. "Your challenge is accepted. But know this. Failure will bring a fate far worse than death for both you and the child." Kel's breath caught, but he didn't waver. His gaze shifted to Alina, her small form still trembling but her eyes now locked on his with a flicker of hope. He nodded to her, a silent promise that he would not abandon her, no matter the cost. The Eldrax turned to the crowd, its voice booming with authority. "Let the trial of the void begin." As the chamber erupted into roars of approval and anticipation, Kale felt the weight of the galaxy bearing down on him. The stakes were higher than he had ever faced, but he would not falter. He had no choice. The child's life, and perhaps something far greater, depended on his courage. The shadows of the Velian throne stretched long, but within them, a spark of defiance began to glow. The trial of the void. Kale Draven's heart pounded as the Eldrax's booming declaration echoed through the chamber. Around him, the crowd surged with alien voices, an overwhelming cacophony of excitement and malice. This was no ordinary trial. The trial of the void was a test whispered about in hushed tones across the galaxy, a challenge so perilous it bordered on myth. Few dared to face it, and none were known to have succeeded. The crystalline floor beneath Cal's boots began to shift, pulsing with energy as the arena transformed. Golden conduits of light wove intricate patterns around him and the trembling child, Alina. The shackles that bound her shattered into glittering fragments, dissolving into the air. She stumbled but remained upright, her wide eyes fixed on Kale, trusting him without words. A new voice resonated, ancient and disembodied. The trial of the void is a measure of resolve, wit, and endurance. Success grants redemption. Failure, obliteration. Kale turned to Alina and knelt before her, his voice low but steady. "Alina, I need you to trust me. Whatever happens, stay close, and don't give up. Can you do that?" The girl hesitated, then nodded, her small hand reaching for his. He squeezed it briefly before standing to face the Eldrax, who loomed above with an expression of alien satisfaction. "The trial is simple in design," the Eldrax explained, its glowing eyes narrowing. "You must navigate the Void Rift, a place where reality bends and breaks. You will face trials born of your mind's fears and weaknesses. Survive, and the child will be spared. Fail, and both your lives are forfeit." With a wave of its crystalline arm, the Eldrax conjured a portal of swirling black and violet light. The edges shimmered like liquid glass, and Kale felt a cold wind emanating from its depths, carrying whispers of something ancient and malevolent. Kale straightened his shoulders, his resolve hardening. "We accept your trial." Without hesitation, he stepped forward, leading Alina by the hand. Together, they crossed the threshold, the portal's energy swallowing them whole. The shifting abyss. The Void Rift was unlike anything Kel had ever experienced. They emerged into a realm where the laws of physics no longer held sway. The ground beneath their feet seemed to ripple like water, yet it was solid enough to stand on. The sky, or what passed for it, was a chaotic swirl of colors that defied logic, with fragments of distant worlds drifting endlessly. Kale tightened his grip on Alina's hand as she gasped, her eyes darting around in wonder and fear. "What is this place?" she whispered. "It's a test," Kale replied, scanning their surroundings. "It's meant to break us, but we're not going to let it." The first trial came swiftly. The air shimmered, and shapes began to form from the swirling chaos. At first, they were indistinct, like shadows given life. Then they solidified, taking on grotesque forms that mirrored Cal's deepest fears. Figures from his past, memories of deals gone wrong, faces of those he had failed to save. One of the figures stepped forward, its face a twisted mockery of a human merchant he had once betrayed to escape capture. Its voice was a rasping echo. "You think you can protect her? You couldn't even protect yourself." Cale forced himself to stand firm, even as the figure loomed closer. "You're not real," he said, his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. "You're nothing but a shadow." The figure snarled, lunging at him, but Cale didn't flinch. As it passed through him, it dissolved into wisps of smoke, its form dissipating into the air. "Cale!" Alina cried, pointing behind him. He turned to see more shadows forming, these ones larger and more menacing. They surrounded the pair, closing in with predatory intent. Cale knew they couldn't simply stand their ground this time. "Run," he said, pulling Alina with him as they sprinted across the unstable terrain. The ground shifted beneath them, forcing Cale to adjust his footing constantly. Behind them, the shadows gave chase, their movements unnaturally fast and fluid, a test of trust. As they ran, Cale spotted a glowing archway in the distance, its golden light a beacon of hope. "There," he shouted, urging Alina forward. "We need to reach that." The terrain grew more treacherous as they approached, with jagged edges and sudden drops into an endless void. Alina stumbled, her small legs unable to keep up with the erratic shifts. Cale scooped her up without hesitation, carrying her as he leaped across gaps and dodged collapsing platforms. The shadows closed in, their claws swiping dangerously close. One struck Cale's leg, and he stumbled, pain flaring up his side. He gritted his teeth, refusing to slow down. "We're almost there," he gasped. Reaching the archway, Cale pushed Alina through first. The moment she crossed the threshold, the shadows halted, their forms disintegrating like sand caught in a storm. Cale followed, collapsing to his knees as the golden light surrounded them. The Rift's judgment. They found themselves in a circular chamber, the air calm but heavy with expectation. Alina knelt beside Cale, her small hands pressing against his injured leg. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. Cale managed a faint smile. "I'm fine, kid. Just a scratch." Before them, a new figure emerged, this one composed entirely of light. Its voice was neither harsh nor kind, but neutral, as though it spoke for the void itself. "You have passed the first trial. Fear, your resolve has been measured, but the path ahead is long." Cale staggered to his feet, helping Alina up as well. "What's next?" he asked, his tone defiant despite his exhaustion. The figure's light grew brighter, engulfing the chamber. "The second trial awaits. Only those who confront the truth of their hearts may proceed." Cale glanced at Alina, her small face filled with determination despite the fear in her eyes. He nodded to her, and together, they stepped forward into the unknown, ready to face whatever came next. The trial of truth. Cale and Alina emerged from the brilliant light into a space that was eerily serene. Unlike the chaos of the Void Rift's first trial, this place was unnervingly quiet. The ground beneath their feet was smooth, reflective, and endless, as if they were walking on the surface of a darkened lake. Above them, a vast, empty sky stretched out, dotted with unfamiliar constellations that seemed to pulse faintly, like distant heartbeats. Alina clung to Cale's side, her small hand gripping his tightly. "It feels different here," she whispered. Cale nodded, his eyes scanning their surroundings. "That's the point," he said softly. "This isn't about fear anymore. This is something deeper." Before he could say more, a ripple spread through the ground ahead of them. From the reflection, shapes began to emerge, first as faint outlines, and then as solid forms. Cale tensed, instinctively placing himself between Alina and the figures. The shapes resolved into people, or rather, echoes of people. They looked familiar, yet wrong, their features blurred and shifting. Cale felt a chill run down his spine as he recognized one of them. A woman with fiery red hair and piercing green eyes. Her voice was as sharp as he remembered. "Cale Draven," she said, stepping closer. You always did have a knack for running from the truth. Confronting the past, Cale froze, his breath catching in his throat. The woman was Maris, a former partner in trade, and someone he had betrayed years ago to save himself. Her gaze was as cutting as ever, even in this spectral form. "You abandoned me," she said, her tone devoid of anger, but heavy with accusation. "Left me to face the fallout alone. And now you think you can save someone else." Cale's jaw tightened. "This isn't real," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "You're not Maris. You're just another part of the trial." The specter of Maris tilted her head. "Real or not, the truth doesn't change. You've spent your whole life running from it." As she spoke, other figures emerged from the reflective surface. A younger version of himself, desperate and starving. An alien trader he had swindled. A child who had begged for his help, only to be turned away. Each figure carried its own weight of judgment, their expressions cutting into him like blades. Cale tried to step back, but the ground beneath him seemed to hold him in place. "I did what I had to do," he said, his voice low and defensive. "I made choices to survive. And those choices cost others their survival," Maris countered. "You've always justified your actions as necessity, but when have you ever faced the consequences?" A test of integrity. Cale turned to Alina, who was staring at the figures with wide, confused eyes. "Is it true?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Did you hurt those people?" Cale's heart ached at the question. He had never been a hero, never claimed to be. He was a traitor, a survivor, someone who did what needed to be done in a galaxy that didn't care about morality. But now, facing Alina's innocent gaze, the weight of his choices felt unbearable. "Yes," he admitted, his voice breaking. "I've done things I'm not proud of. Hurt people, betrayed them, left them behind. But I can't change that. All I can do is try to be better now." Maris's specter smiled faintly, though it didn't reach her eyes. "And what makes you think you deserve a second chance?" "I don't," Cale said, meeting her gaze. "But that doesn't mean I won't fight for one." As he spoke, the reflective ground began to ripple again. The figures faltered, their forms wavering. Alina stepped forward, her small voice cutting through the heavy silence. "He's trying to help me," she said, her eyes fixed on Maris. "And that's what matters, right? People can change. They just need a chance." The truth revealed. The specters paused, their expressions softening. Maris turned back to Cale, her face unreadable. "Perhaps you're not the man you were," she said quietly. "But the truth doesn't vanish, Cale. It shapes you. If you want to move forward, you must carry it with you." With that, the figures dissolved into the ground, their reflections fading into nothingness. The serene silence returned, and Cale felt the oppressive weight lift from his chest. He knelt, pulling Alina into a gentle embrace. "Thank you," he murmured, "for believing in me." Alina hugged him back tightly. "You didn't leave me behind," she said. "That's enough." The path forward. A new figure emerged from the horizon, this one composed of radiant light, like the one that had guided them before. Its voice echoed with calm authority. "You have faced the truths of your past and accepted them. The path forward lies open." The reflective ground split, revealing a glowing bridge that stretched into the infinite distance. Cale stood, taking Alina's hand once more. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice steady now. Alina nodded. "I trust you." Together, they stepped onto the bridge, leaving behind the trial of truth and walking toward whatever awaited them in the depths of the void rift. Cale didn't know what challenges lay ahead, but he felt something he hadn't in years: hope. The trial of sacrifice. Cale and Alina stepped onto the glowing bridge, its translucent surface radiating warmth and energy that belied the endless void surrounding them. The bridge stretched out into infinity, its edges dissolving into a swirling haze of gold and silver. Each step felt deliberate, the atmosphere heavy with expectation. The silence around them was both soothing and unnerving, as if the void itself was holding its breath. Ahead, a massive archway of dark, shimmering stone materialized out of the emptiness. It pulsed with an otherworldly rhythm, drawing them closer like a heartbeat in the dark. As they approached, the archway's center began to glow, forming an aperture of liquid light. Kel's grip on Alina's hand tightened. "Stay close," he said, his voice firm but calm. "I won't let go," Alina replied, her voice small but resolute. They passed through the archway together, and the world shifted again. The Garden of Dilemmas. The pair found themselves standing in a lush alien garden unlike anything they had ever seen. Trees with iridescent leaves stretched toward a sky of swirling opal clouds. Flowers of every imaginable hue bloomed in impossible patterns, their scents filling the air with a heady sweetness. A crystal-clear stream meandered through the landscape, its waters glowing faintly. But there was something unnatural about the perfection. It was too beautiful, too serene. Kel's instincts, honed from years of navigating treacherous terrain and deceptive deals, told him this was no sanctuary. A figure emerged from the trees, a woman, radiant and otherworldly. Her hair shimmered like molten gold, and her eyes held galaxies within them. She wore a flowing robe of translucent light that seemed to merge with the air around her. "Welcome to the trial of sacrifice," she said, her voice melodic yet weighted with gravity. "Here you will be tested not by what you fear or what you believe, but by what you are willing to lose." Kel straightened, his jaw tightening. "What do you mean?" The woman gestured toward the stream. "This trial is simple in concept, but profound in consequence. You must make a choice. Beyond this garden lies the path to your goal, but it is guarded by the guardian of the rift. To pass, you must offer something of great value." Kel frowned. "And what exactly are we supposed to offer?" The woman's gaze shifted to Alina. "That is for you to decide." A cruel choice. Kel felt his blood run cold. He stepped protectively in front of Alina, his eyes narrowing. "If you think I'm sacrificing her, you've got another thing coming." The woman's expression didn't change, but her voice softened. "The child's life is not the only offering the guardian will accept. Sacrifice comes in many forms. Your challenge is to determine what you value most, and whether you are willing to part with it." Kel glanced at Alina, who clung to his side, her wide eyes filled with fear and trust. Then he turned back to the woman, his mind racing. "What happens if I refuse?" "Then the trial ends here," she said simply. "And so do your lives." Kel's fists clenched. He had faced impossible odds before, but this was different. This wasn't a negotiation or a battlefield. It was a personal reckoning. The stakes weren't just his survival, but Alina's, and perhaps something far greater. "Is there a way to face this guardian without sacrificing anything?" Kel asked, his voice edged with desperation. The woman shook her head slowly. "The path forward requires a cost. There is no way around it." The guardian appears. Before Kel could respond, the ground beneath them began to tremble. The crystal-clear stream turned dark, its glow replaced by a pulsing red light. From the horizon, a towering figure emerged. It was the guardian, an entity of immense size and power, its form shifting between solid and ethereal. Its eyes were molten orbs of gold, and its presence was suffocating. The guardian's voice rumbled through the garden, deep and resonant. "Who dared seek passage through my domain?" Kel stepped forward, his body tense but unyielding. "I do, and I'll offer whatever it takes to get us through." The guardian's gaze fell upon him, its golden eyes piercing. "Will you? Let us see if your words hold weight." With a wave of its colossal hand, the guardian summoned a pedestal between them. Upon it, a shimmering orb appeared, radiating a light that pulsed in time with Kel's heartbeat. He instinctively knew what it was, a manifestation of his memories, his identity, everything that made him who he was. "You must choose," the guardian intoned. "Offer the child, offer your essence, or offer your future. Only then," Shall the path be revealed? Cal's decision. Cal's mind spun as the weight of the decision bore down on him. The first option was unthinkable. Alina's life wasn't a bargaining chip. The second was equally horrifying. To give up his essence would mean losing himself, becoming an empty shell. And the third, the future, was an unknown cost, a gamble he didn't fully understand. He turned to Alina, who was staring at him with wide, tearful eyes. "Cal," she whispered, her voice trembling, "you can't give up yourself. I can't do this alone." Cal knelt in front of her, placing his hands gently on her shoulders. "Alina, listen to me. You're not alone, and you never will be. But I have to make this choice to protect you." She nodded, her small hand gripping his tightly. "I trust you." Cal stood and faced the Guardian. "I offer my future," he said, his voice steady. "Take whatever comes next for me, but leave her untouched." The Guardian studied him for a long moment, its golden eyes glowing brighter. "So be it." The path opens. The orb on the pedestal dissolved, and the garden trembled as the glowing bridge reappeared before them. The Guardian's form began to fade, its voice echoing as it vanished. "Your sacrifice is accepted. The path forward is yours." Cal felt a strange emptiness settle in his chest, as if a part of him had been taken. He didn't know what the cost of his decision would be, but he pushed the thought aside. Alina's safety was worth any price. He turned to her, offering a reassuring smile. "Let's keep moving." Together, they stepped onto the bridge, the light guiding them toward the next trial. Cal couldn't shake the feeling that his sacrifice was only the beginning of what the Void Rift demanded. But as long as Alina was by his side, he would face whatever came next. A trial of unity. Cal and Alina walked forward on the glowing bridge, their footsteps echoing faintly in the endless void. The emptiness around them seemed to grow heavier with each step, as if the air itself were burdened by unseen weight. Cal tried to focus on the light ahead, a faint beacon promising the next stage of their journey. But in the back of his mind, a gnawing question lingered. What had he truly given up in the trial of sacrifice? Alina's small voice broke the silence. "Cal, do you think we're almost done?" Cal glanced down at her, his lips curving into a faint smile. "I don't know, kid, but we'll face whatever comes next together." She nodded, her grip on his hand tightening. Together. The bridge ended abruptly, opening into a vast expanse of interconnected platforms. Each floated in the void, glowing faintly, and connected by thin, fragile-looking beams of light. The platforms were arranged in a labyrinthine pattern, spiraling out into infinity. As Cal and Alina stepped onto the first platform, a deep, resonant hum filled the air. A figure materialized in front of them, its form translucent and shifting, as if made of liquid light. Its voice was calm and deliberate. "You have reached the trial of unity," it said. "Here, your bond will be tested. Only by working together can you proceed." The labyrinth of challenges. The figure gestured, and 3 objects appeared on the platform: a small, glowing orb, a jagged stone, and a golden key. Each object pulsed with energy, radiating a faint hum. "The path forward lies in solving the labyrinth's challenges," the figure continued. "Each test will require trust, cooperation, and understanding. Succeed, and the way forward will reveal itself. Fail, and the void will consume you." With that, the figure dissolved into the air, leaving Cal and Alina alone on the platform. Cal frowned, studying the objects carefully. "This is more than just a puzzle," he muttered. "It's testing us, how we work together." Alina knelt beside the objects, her small hands hovering over them. "What do we do first?" Cal hesitated, then pointed to the glowing orb. "Let's start there. It feels connected somehow." As Alina reached for the orb, the platform beneath their feet trembled. The air around them shimmered, and the edges of the labyrinth began to shift and rearrange. The orb floated into the air, casting beams of light onto the connecting beams ahead. It projected a faint map of the labyrinth, showing them the path to the next platform. The first challenge. Kale studied the map, memorizing the illuminated path. "We have to stay on these beams," he said, gesturing to the faintly glowing connections. "If we step off, we're done." Alina nodded, her face determined. "I'll follow you." They moved carefully, balancing on the narrow beams as they crossed to the next platform. The void below them seemed to pulse, as if alive, and Kale fought the urge to look down. When they reached the next platform, they found a new challenge waiting for them. 2 levers, each engraved with alien runes, and a riddle etched into the platform itself. Kale read the riddle aloud. "To open the path, balance must be maintained. One pulls forward, the other holds back. Choose wisely." Alina tilted her head, studying the levers. "It's like a seesaw," she said. "If we pull one too hard, the other won't work." Kale nodded, impressed by her quick thinking. "Exactly. We'll have to pull them together, slowly and evenly." They stood on either side of the platform, each gripping a lever. "On 3, Kale said. 1, 2, 3. They pulled in unison, the levers resisting at first before moving smoothly. The platform glowed brighter, and the map projected by the orb shifted, revealing the next part of the path. Kale exhaled in relief, glancing at Alina with a smile. "Good job, kid." She grinned. "We're a good team." The web of illusions. The next segment of the labyrinth was more complex. The beams twisted into intricate patterns, some of them flickering and unstable. Kale crouched, examining the glowing lines. "Some of these beams are traps," he muttered. "They'll collapse if we step on them." "How can we tell which ones are safe?" Alina asked, her brow furrowing. Kale tapped the orb, which now hovered beside them. Its light intensified, casting faint outlines over the beams. The safe paths glowed faintly, while the unstable ones shimmered erratically. "There," he said. "Follow the ones that don't flicker." Alina nodded, stepping onto the first beam with cautious precision. Kale followed close behind, his eyes scanning the path ahead. As they moved, the void around them seemed to whisper faint voices echoing from the darkness. "Kale," Alina said, her voice shaking slightly. "Do you hear that?" "Ignore it," Kale said firmly. "It's just another trick. Keep moving." The whispers grew louder, forming words that clawed at Kale's mind. "You will fail. You cannot protect her. She will be lost." Kale shook his head, focusing on the path. "Don't listen to them, Alina. They're not real." "I'm trying," she said, her voice trembling. "But it's so loud." Kale stopped, crouching down to meet her eyes. "Look at me," he said gently. "You're stronger than this. Focus on me, not the voices. We'll get through this together." Alina nodded, taking a deep breath. "Okay." The final platform. They reached the final platform, where a massive glowing door awaited them. Its surface was engraved with symbols that pulsed with rhythmic energy. The orb floated to the center of the platform, projecting an intricate puzzle in the air. "This is it," Kale said. "The last challenge." The puzzle was a complex array of shifting pieces, each glowing with a different color. Kale and Alina worked together, their movements synchronized as they rotated and aligned the pieces. The whispers from the void grew louder, but Alina's determination didn't waver. She mirrored Kale's focus, her small hands moving with surprising confidence. As the final piece clicked into place, the door began to glow, its surface splitting open to reveal a new path. The whispers ceased, replaced by a deep, resonant hum. "You did it," Kale said, ruffling Alina's hair. "We did it," she corrected, a proud smile spreading across her face. The glowing path stretched ahead, beckoning them forward. Kale took Alina's hand, and together they stepped into the light, ready to face whatever lay beyond the trial of unity. The trial of eternity. Kale and Alina emerged from the glowing path into a realm that defied comprehension. The air felt thicker here, charged with a weight that seemed to press on their very souls. Around them, Fragments of reality floated in an endless expanse, a surreal college of broken worlds, shimmering waterfalls that flowed upward, and stars trapped in translucent bubbles of energy. The path beneath their feet was no longer solid. Instead, it was a shifting ribbon of light, twisting and curling as if alive. Kale instinctively pulled Alina closer, his protective instincts kicking in. "Where are we?" Alina whispered, her voice trembling. Kale scanned the strange expanse, his eyes narrowing. "I don't know. But this feels different. Bigger." Before he could say more, a deep, resonant voice echoed through the space. It was neither warm nor cold, but infinite, a voice that carried the weight of countless eons. "You have reached the trial of eternity," the voice declared. "Here, time itself will test your resolve. To proceed, you must face the weight of your past, the pull of your future, and the fleeting nature of the present." The first rift. Echoes of the past. A ripple spread across the void, and suddenly, the space around them shifted. They stood in a dimly lit room, Cal's old ship. The familiar hum of its engines thrummed beneath his feet, and the air carried the metallic tang he hadn't smelled in years. The sight was so vivid it stole his breath. Alina tugged at his sleeve. "What is this place?" "It's my past," Cale said, his voice thick. He recognized every detail, the worn-out pilot's seat, the mismatched panels he patched together, even the faint scorch marks on the walls from a near-fatal escape. A figure appeared in the doorway, and Cal's stomach sank. It was a younger version of himself, leaner, sharper, and angrier. The specter's eyes burned with ambition and bitterness, a man willing to do whatever it took to survive. "You're weak," the younger Cal spat, stepping closer. "You think you can change? You think you can save her?" He gestured to Alina with disdain. "She's just another weight around your neck, just like all the others you left behind." Cale clenched his fists, his heart pounding. "I made mistakes. I know that, but I'm not that man anymore." The specter laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "You'll always be me. No amount of running or pretending changes that." Alina stepped forward, her small frame defiant. "He's not you," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "He's better." The younger Cale sneered, but his form began to waver, the conviction in Alina's voice unraveling the illusion. Cale placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice calm but firm. "Let's go. This part of me doesn't matter anymore." As they walked forward, the room dissolved, fading into the void once more. The second rift. The pull of the future. The void shifted again, and they found themselves standing on the edge of a vast, alien city. Towering spires reached toward a sky streaked with electric blue clouds. The air buzzed with energy, and Cal could feel the hum of countless lives bustling within the city's heart. A figure stepped forward, cloaked in shimmering silver. Its face was obscured, but its presence was commanding. "This is your future," it said, its voice layered and resonant. "The choices you make will shape what comes next." The figure gestured, and visions began to unfold. In one, Cale stood alone, his face hardened by years of loss and sacrifice. In another, he was surrounded by people, humans and aliens alike, working together to build something greater than himself. And then came the darkest vision. Alina, standing alone in a desolate wasteland, her eyes hollow with despair. Cal's chest tightened. "What are you trying to show me?" "The future is not fixed," the figure replied. "It is shaped by your decisions, your sacrifices, your resolve. Each path is born from what you choose now." Cale turned to Alina, her wide eyes reflecting the swirling possibilities before them. "I don't care about power or glory," he said, his voice steady. "I care about her. I care about making sure she has a chance to live, to grow, to be free." The figure inclined its head, and the visions faded. "Then let that guide you." The final rift, the fleeting present. The world shifted once more, and they found themselves standing on a narrow platform suspended in the void. Above them, Time itself seemed to unravel. Stars burst and reformed in moments, planets aged and crumbled into dust, and galaxies spun faster than the eye could follow. The voice returned, deeper and more resonant than before. The present is the most fragile of all. It is fleeting, and yet it holds the greatest power. Will you seize it, or will you let it slip through your grasp? Kale looked down at Alina, who stared up at him with unwavering trust. I won't let it slip away, he said, his voice resolute. A massive hourglass appeared before them, its sand glowing like molten gold. The grains fell slowly, each one pulsating with energy. The voice spoke again. You must act before the final grain falls. But beware, every action comes with a cost. As the hourglass ticked away, the platform began to fracture, pieces falling into the void. Kale and Alina moved quickly, working together to stabilize the crumbling surface. Each step they took brought the platform closer to reforming, but every movement drained their energy, leaving them gasping for breath. The hourglass's final grain teetered on the edge, and Kale made a split-second decision. He threw himself forward, shielding Alina as the platform solidified beneath them. The eternal choice. The hourglass vanished, and the void stilled. The voice spoke one last time, softer now. You have faced eternity and emerged whole. You have embraced your past, shaped your future, and seized the present. The path forward is yours. A golden archway appeared ahead, glowing with a light that felt warm and welcoming. Kale turned to Alina, exhaustion etched into his features, but a faint smile on his lips. Let's finish this. Together, they stepped through the archway, leaving the trial of eternity behind. What lay ahead was still unknown, but Kale no longer feared the challenges to come. He had faced the void, and he was ready.